From a distance, a medieval castle looked powerful, noble, and secure. Thick stone walls, a heavy gatehouse, towers rising above the countryside, banners moving in the wind. It looked like a place built for greatness. But inside its walls, daily life was cold, smoky, crowded, exhausting, and ruled by fear, duty, and hierarchy. In the year 1200, before war reached the gates, a castle was not just a fortress. It was a machine of survival, a small enclosed world where dozens of people lived, worked, argued, prayed, and slept within arm's reach of each other, governed by routines that had not changed in generations. Most of those people were not lords and ladies. They were cooks, grooms, guards, servants, washerwomen, and labourers. They lived in the shadow of stone walls, but the walls were not built for their comfort. They were built for defence. This is what life inside a medieval castle was really like before war changed everything. We are going to spend a full day inside a medieval castle in the year 1200. We will see who lived there, how they slept, what they ate, how they worked, how the Lord ruled, how the servants survived, and why everything changed when the first rumours of war began to reach the gates. This is not a story of knights and glory. It is a story of stone, smoke, cold water, hard bread, and the 1,000 small tasks that kept a castle alive. The castle woke before the sun. In the darkness before dawn, the first sounds were not trumpets or drums. They were the scraping of iron on stone, the clatter of buckets, the creak of a heavy wooden door being pushed open, and the low voices of servants who had been awake for an hour already. The kitchen workers rose first. They climbed from straw pallets on the floor of the service buildings, pulled on rough wool tunics, and walked through the cold courtyard toward the kitchen, where the fire had been kept alive overnight by a boy whose only job was to feed it through the dark hours. Kitchen was already warm. It was the warmest place in the castle, and it was warm because of the great hearth that dominated one wall, a fire large enough to roast an animal whole, burning logs as thick as a man's leg, radiating heat that could be felt from across the room. The rest of the castle was stone, and stone held the cold the way a jar holds water. In winter, the chill never left. In summer, it only softened. Outside the kitchen, the courtyard was a world of its own, mud underfoot, the smell of horse dung, wet straw, and wood smoke, a rooster crowing from somewhere near the stables, a dog nosing through scraps near the kitchen door, a groom leading a horse to water at the stone trough near the well. The chapel bell rang, not loud, but enough. It marked the first service of the day, prime. A few people crossed the courtyard toward the small stone chapel. The chaplain, the Lord's wife if she was awake, perhaps one or two household members who took their faith seriously. Most people did not attend. They had work to do. Before a lord held court, before soldiers trained, before bread was cut in the hall, the castle had already been awake for hours. The courtyard filled slowly. Guards changed on the walls. Stable workers fed the horses. A smith opened the door of his forge and began heating his fire. Women carried water from the well, heavy wooden buckets, rough rope, cold hands. A boy swept the entrance to the great hall. A steward checked the storerooms and counted what remained of the flour, the salted meat, the ale. By the time the sun broke above the walls, the castle was already in motion, not with urgency, not with excitement, with the quiet, grinding rhythm of a place that ran on routine, where every person had a task and every task had to be done again tomorrow. A medieval castle in 1200 was not a home. It was a small society. At the top of that society sat the Lord. He was the master of the castle, the holder of the land, the dispenser of justice, and the man who owed military service to the king. Everything in the castle existed because of him, and everything in the castle answered to him. The lord lived in the best rooms, the upper chamber of the keep, or a private solar built against the wall of the great hall, a room with a real bed, heavy curtains, perhaps a fireplace, and a door that could be closed. Privacy was the greatest luxury in a medieval castle, and the lord was one of the only people who had any. His wife, the lady of the castle, managed the household. This was not a decorative role. She oversaw the servants, managed the stores, kept the accounts of food and supplies, supervised the kitchen, and maintained the domestic order that kept dozens of people fed, clothed, and functional. When the lord was away on campaign at court, visiting other lords, the lady governed in his place. She held the keys. She gave the orders. She kept the castle running. Their children lived in the castle too, though their lives were shaped early by duty. Sons of noble families were often sent away by the age of 7 to serve as pages in another lord's household, learning the skills and manners they would need as knights. Daughters were educated in domestic management, needlework, and the social graces expected of a future wife. Childhood in a castle was short. Below the lord's family, the castle housed a small army of household staff. The steward was the lord's right hand in domestic matters, managing finances, supplies, and the daily operation of the castle. The marshal oversaw the horses and the stables. The chaplain served the spiritual needs of the household and often acted as the lord's secretary, since he was frequently the only person in the castle who could read and write. The knights and men-at-arms formed the military corps. Some were permanent residents, household knights who lived in the castle and owed their service directly to the lord. Others were tenants who held land from the lord in exchange for a set number of days of military service each year. They trained in the courtyard, maintained their weapons and armor, and waited for the call that might come at any time. Then there were the workers, cooks, bakers, brewers, laundresses, grooms, stable boys, blacksmiths, carpenters, masons, porters, watchmen, and general servants. These were the people who made the castle function. They carried the water, lit the fires, swept the floors, stirred the pots, shod the horses, repaired the walls, and emptied the chamber pots. They slept in the service buildings, in the corners of the great hall, in the stables, wherever there was space. Their bedding was straw. Their clothing was rough wool. Their meals were simpler than the lord's table. Their work began before dawn and ended after dark. A castle in 1200 might house anywhere from 30 to over 100 people, depending on its size and the status of its lord. All of them lived within the same walls, breathed the same smoky air, drank from the same well, and heard the same chapel bell. But they did not live the same life. The distance between the lord's solar and the servant's pallet was measured not in feet, but in centuries of tradition, obligation, and inequality. If you stepped inside a medieval castle expecting comfort, you would be disappointed within minutes. The Great Hall was the largest room in the castle, and it served as dining room, meeting place, courtroom, and sleeping quarters all at once. A long trestle table ran down the center. Benches lined both sides. At one end, on a raised platform called the dais, the lord and his family sat at a higher table, looking down over the rest of the hall. The hall was impressive in scale, but brutal in comfort. The floor was stone or packed earth, covered with rushes, dried reeds mixed with herbs to mask the smell of food scraps, spilled ale, and whatever the dogs had left behind. The rushes were replaced occasionally, but not often enough. The lower layers grew damp, rotten, and foul. The main source of heat was a central hearth or, in more advanced castles, a fireplace built into the wall. Either way, the warmth was local, not universal. People sitting near the fire were warm. People sitting 10 feet away were cold. People sleeping in the far corners of the hall or in the service rooms felt the full weight of the English climate pressing through stone. Smoke was constant. Whether from the central hearth, the kitchen fires, the torches on the walls, or the candles on the Lord's table, smoke filled every room in the castle. It stained the walls. It blackened the rafters. It stung the eyes and thickened in the lungs. The smell of wood smoke was so embedded in the fabric of castle life that people stopped noticing it, the way a sailor stops noticing the sea. Windows in a castle were narrow. They were designed for defense, not light. Arrow slits and small openings let in thin shafts of daylight but kept out arrows and wind, though in practice they kept out the arrows better than the wind. Some windows in the Lord's chambers had glass, which was expensive and rare. Most had wooden shutters or oiled linen, and when they were closed, the rooms fell into a dim twilight, even at midday. Warmth was local, comfort belonged to rank, privacy barely existed. Winter entered through stone, wood, and cloth alike. The food in a castle was better than what a peasant ate in the village, but it was not what modern people imagine when they think of medieval feasting. The main meal of the day was dinner, served late in the morning or around midday. For the lord and his family, it might include roasted meat, mutton, pork, beef, or game, bread, cheese, vegetables from the castle garden, and ale or wine. The meat was often heavily salted or spiced, not for flavor but for preservation. Fresh meat was available only when an animal was slaughtered or game was hunted. The rest of the time, the castle ate from its stores. For the servants and lower household, the food was simpler: pottage, a thick stew of whatever vegetables were available, dark bread, hard cheese, and weak ale. The ale was brewed within the castle walls, and it was consumed in enormous quantities because the water was often unsafe. Supper was lighter: bread, cheese, cold meat if there was any, and more ale. Between meals, people did not snack. Food was rationed, stored, and controlled by the steward, who knew exactly how much the castle had and how long it needed to last. The kitchen itself was a place of intense heat and constant labor. A separate building or a room attached to the great hall, built apart to reduce the risk of fire. Inside, the great hearth blazed from morning to night. Spits turned over the flames, turning joints of meat slowly in the heat. Pots of stew and broth hung from iron hooks. Bread was baked in clay ovens. The cooks worked in temperatures that made the rest of the castle feel like a cellar. Hygiene in the castle was limited by the standards of any age. People washed, but not often and not thoroughly. A basin of cold water and a cloth was the usual method. Baths existed but were rare. A wooden tub filled with water heated over the fire. A luxury reserved for the lord and lady, and even then only occasionally. Most people in the castle went weeks without anything resembling a bath. The latrines, called garderobes, were built into the thickness of the castle walls, with a stone seat over a shaft that dropped waste into a pit or a moat below. They were cold, dark, smelly, and exposed to the wind. Using them in winter was an experience no one looked forward to. Teeth were cleaned with cloths and sometimes with mixtures of salt and herbs, but dental care as a concept did not exist. Tooth decay was universal. The grit from stone ground flour wore down teeth over years, and by middle age, Many people in a castle had lost several. Sleep was governed by rank. The lord and lady slept in a private chamber on a wooden bed frame with a straw or feather mattress covered by wool blankets and perhaps a fur. Curtains hung around the bed, offering a thin barrier of privacy. Everyone else slept where they could. Knights and senior household members might have pallets in the hall. Servants slept on straw near the kitchen or in the service buildings. The stable workers slept in the stables. The guards slept in shifts, never fully resting, always half listening for the sound of the alarm. The castle at night was dark, truly dark. A few torches in the courtyard, a candle or two in the lord's chamber, the glow of the kitchen fire through an open doorway. Beyond that, nothing. The darkness was complete, and the sounds of the castle at night, the wind against stone, the creak of timber, the distant howl of a dog, the breathing of people sleeping inches apart, filled the silence with a constant, low unease. If this kind of reconstruction is something you value, subscribing to Walter Reconstructs History is the best way to make sure the next one happens. Every video takes weeks of research, writing, and production, and your subscription tells me that this work matters. If you have been watching this far, you already care about history done properly. That means a lot. Now, let us step into the working day. A castle in 1200 survived because hundreds of small tasks never stopped. The courtyard was the engine of the castle. From first light to last, it was filled with movement, noise, and purpose. Not the chaotic energy of a market, but the steady, repetitive rhythm of a place where everything had to be done by hand every single day. In the kitchen, the work was relentless. Bread had to be baked daily. The castle consumed enormous quantities of it. Loaves for the lord's table, coarser bread for the household, and the hard, flat trenchers that served as plates, soaked with gravy by the end of the meal and given to the dogs or the poor. The bakers started before dawn and did not finish until the last loaf was out of the oven. The brewers worked on a similar cycle. Ale did not keep well. It had to be brewed frequently, in large batches, using barley malt and water from the well. The brewing process took days, malting, mashing, boiling, fermenting, and the brewers managed it with the kind of quiet expertise that comes from doing the same thing 1,000 times. In the stables, the grooms fed, watered, and exercised the horses. A lord's war horse was one of the most valuable possessions in the castle, worth more than a house, more than a year's income from a village. It had to be kept in perfect condition, groomed, shod, trained, and ready. The grooms also cared for the pack horses, riding horses, and cart horses that kept the castle connected to the outside world. The blacksmith was one of the most important people in the castle. He worked in a small forge in the courtyard, heating iron in his fire and shaping it on his anvil. He made and repaired horseshoes, nails, hinges, chains, buckles, arrowheads, and the 100 small metal fittings that held the castle together. When war was coming, his workload doubled. Weapons needed sharpening, armor needed mending, and new arrowheads needed forging in quantities that kept the fire burning long after dark. Carpenters repaired doors, shutters, benches, tables, carts, and the wooden structures within the castle walls. Masons patched the stonework, filling cracks, repointing joints, replacing damaged blocks. A castle was never finished. It was always being repaired, always fighting against the weather, the weight of its own stone, and the slow erosion of time. Women in the castle worked constantly. Laundresses washed clothing and linens in large wooden tubs, scrubbing fabric against boards, wringing it by hand, and hanging it to dry in the courtyard when the weather allowed. Seamstresses mended clothing, stitched new garments, and repaired the tapestries and hangings that decorated the Lord's chambers and kept some of the cold at bay. Water had to be carried from the well to every part of the castle, multiple times a day. Firewood had to be cut, stacked, and distributed. Rushes had to be gathered, dried, and spread. Candles and tallow had to be made. Chamber pots had to be emptied. Ashes had to be cleared from the hearths. The steward kept track of everything. How much flour remained in the stores, how many barrels of ale were ready, how many sides of salted meat hung in the undercroft, how much grain had been received from the Lord's tenants, how much money had been collected, spent, and owed. The administration of a castle was a constant exercise in logistics, and the steward was the man who kept the numbers straight. Messengers arrived and departed. Riders brought letters, orders, and news from other castles, from the king's court, from neighbouring lords. Information travelled slowly, carried by men on horseback over muddy roads, and every message that arrived changed the calculations of the steward, the plans of the lord, and the mood of the castle. The castle survived because none of this ever stopped. Not for a day, not for a feast, not for a funeral. The bread had to be baked, the horses had to be fed, the walls had to be watched, the fire had to be kept alive. And if any of these things failed, the entire structure, military, domestic, political, began to weaken. A castle in 1200 was as much about power being seen as power being used. The great hall was the stage. Every meal, every meeting, every judgment delivered by the Lord was a performance of authority, watched by everyone in the household and designed to reinforce the order on which the entire castle depended. Dinner in the great hall was not just a meal. It was a ritual. The Lord and his family sat on the dais at the high table elevated above the rest of the room. The best food was served to them first. The best wine, if there was wine, went to their cups. The finest bread, the freshest meat, the most carefully prepared dishes arrived at their table while the rest of the household watched from the benches below. Seating in the hall was determined by rank. The closer you sat to the Lord's table, the higher your status. Knights and senior household members sat near the top. Servants and lower workers sat at the far end, near the door, near the draughts, near the dogs. Everyone knew where they belonged, and sitting in the wrong place was not a small mistake. It was an insult. The Lord received visitors in the hall, travellers, messengers, minor lords, and tenants came to pay their respects, deliver messages, settle disputes, and seek favours. The Lord listened from his seat on the dais, flanked by his steward and his chaplain, and delivered judgments that could change the lives of the people standing before him. Disputes over land, rents, debts, and obligations were heard and settled in the hall. Tenants who owed labour or produce brought their complaints. Neighbours with boundary quarrels appealed to the Lord's authority. Punishments were decided. Fines, seizure of goods, occasionally physical punishment, though the Lord was constrained by custom and by the knowledge that excessive cruelty bred disloyalty. Religion reinforced the hierarchy. The chaplain said grace before meals. The Lord and his family attended chapel services. The church taught that the social order was ordained by God, that lords ruled and servants served, because that was the divine arrangement of the world. Questioning the hierarchy was not just disobedience, it was sin. Clothing marked status as clearly as seating. The Lord and his family wore dyed wool, fine linen, and sometimes silk. Their garments were cut and stitched with care. Brooches, belts, and clasps of silver or gilt marked their rank. The servants wore undyed wool, rough linen, and leather. The difference was visible from across the courtyard, and it was meant to be. Etiquette governed every interaction. A servant did not speak to the Lord unless spoken to. A knight removed his weapons before entering the hall. A visitor waited to be announced. The rituals of courtesy were not decorations on daily life. They were the structure that held the hierarchy in place, and everyone in the castle understood them instinctively. The hall fell quiet when the Lord spoke, not because of fear, though fear was part of it, but because the Lord's word was the law of the castle. His decisions determined who ate, who worked, who was punished, and who was rewarded. In a world without police, without courts, without any authority beyond the Lord and the church, his power was absolute within the walls, and the walls made that power visible. The great hall, the keep, the towers, the gatehouse, these were not just functional structures, they were symbols. They said to every person who entered the castle and to every person who saw it from the road, "Here lives a man who commands, and here is the proof." No one in the castle knew exactly when the war would come, but everyone knew it was coming. It started with the messengers. A rider arrived at the gate one afternoon, his horse lathered with sweat, his cloak spattered with mud. He was brought to the Lord immediately, and the two of them withdrew to the solar, closing the door behind them. The household noticed. In a castle, closed doors were news. Within the hour, the mood had shifted. The Lord emerged from the solar with a face that told the steward everything he needed to know. Orders were given, quietly at first, without alarm. Check the stores, count the arrows, inspect the walls. The steward walked to the undercroft and began his inventory. Barrels of salted meat, sacks of grain and flour, ale, dried fish, beans, cheese. He counted everything, and he counted it again. He calculated how many days the castle could hold if the gates were closed and no supplies came in. The number was not comforting, but it was not desperate. Not yet. On the walls, the guards changed their routine. Where one man had walked the circuit, now two walked it. The intervals between patrols shortened. The watchmen on the gatehouse tower were told to look harder, to scan the roads and the tree line for movement, for dust, for anything that did not belong. In the courtyard, the blacksmith's hammer rang louder and longer than usual. He was making arrowheads. Bundles of arrow shafts had been brought from the storeroom, and a man sat near the forge, fletching them with goose feathers, working steadily, saying nothing. Nearby, a carpenter was repairing the frame of a wooden hoarding, the temporary timber gallery that would be mounted on the battlements to give the defenders better angles during a siege. The knights began training with a new intensity. In the bailey, men drilled with sword and shield, their movements harder, faster, less like practice and more like preparation. The clatter of wooden training weapons echoed off the stone walls. A knight checked his chainmail, holding it up to the light, looking for broken links. He found 3 and took the shirt to the blacksmith. The Lord held council in the solar. The steward, the marshal, the chaplain, and the most senior knight sat with him around a table. Maps were spread. Names were spoken. Names of neighbouring lords, names of potential allies and enemies, names of the men who might ride toward this castle with hostile intent. The conversation was low, measured, and tense. No one raised their voice. No one needed to. In the kitchen, the mood changed in subtle ways. The cooks were told to bake more bread than usual and to salt more meat. The ale production increased. These were not dramatic orders, they were practical ones. But everyone in the kitchen understood what they meant. You do not stockpile food unless you expect to need it. The women noticed too, the laundresses, the seamstresses, the women who carried water and cleaned the hall. They heard the tone of the conversations, saw the messengers arriving, felt the change in the air. Some of them had lived through siege before. They knew what it looked and sounded like when a castle began to prepare. They said nothing. They worked harder. A second messenger arrived 2 days later. He came from the east, riding fast, and he brought confirmation. A force was gathering. It was not yet marching, but it was assembling. Men, horses, wagons. The direction was unclear. The target was uncertain, but the threat was real. The Lord ordered the gatehouse inspected. The portcullis was tested, the heavy iron grate that dropped from above to seal the entrance. The drawbridge mechanism, if the castle had one, was examined. The hinges of the great wooden doors were oiled and checked. Every point of entry was scrutinized with the attention of a man who knew that one weak link could mean the fall of everything. Farmers and tenants from the surrounding countryside began arriving at the castle. Some brought their families, some brought livestock, sheep, pigs, chickens driven through the gatehouse into the crowded bailey. Some brought grain, all of them brought fear. The castle, which had been a crowded place in peacetime, grew more crowded still. The courtyard filled with animals, carts, bedrolls, and people who had nowhere else to go. The chaplain held an extra service. The chapel was fuller than usual. People who rarely prayed now knelt on the cold stone floor and asked God for protection. The chaplain spoke of faith and endurance. He did not speak of victory. He did not promise anything. At night, the castle felt different. The torches on the walls seemed brighter against the darkness. The guards spoke less. The courtyard was quieter after dark, but it was not peaceful. It was the quiet of people, listening, waiting, uncertain. The children felt it. They did not understand the politics or the strategy, but they understood that the adults were afraid. The games in the courtyard stopped. The laughter faded. Children stayed closer to their mothers and watched the gates with wide, uncertain eyes. War had not arrived. No army stood at the walls. No arrows had been loosed. No siege engines creaked into position on the ridge. But the castle had already changed. The routine that had sustained it, the bread, the ale, the water, the fire, the chapel bell, still continued. But now it continued under a shadow. Every task was the same, and every task felt different. The castle was still a machine of survival, but now it was being tested. Night fell over the castle, and for one more evening, the world held still. The great hall emptied slowly after supper. The trestle tables were cleared. The benches were pushed back against the walls. The fire in the hearth was banked enough to keep the embers alive until morning, not enough to waste fuel that might be needed later. The dogs settled near the warmth. A few servants unrolled their pallets on the floor and lay down in the half-light. In the Lord's solar, the candles burned late. The Lord sat with his steward, reviewing the inventory one final time. How many days of grain? How many barrels of ale? How many arrows? How many men fit to fight? The numbers were written on a piece of parchment, and the Lord studied them the way a man studies a wound, trying to decide if it will heal. On the walls, the night watch began its slow circuit. 2 guards walked the battlements, their footsteps quiet on the stone, their breath visible in the cold air. They paused at each tower, looked out over the dark countryside, and saw nothing. Fields, woodland, a thin line of road disappearing into the blackness. The wind moved the banners on the towers, and the fabric snapped and fluttered. The only sound besides the wind itself. In the chapel, the chaplain knelt alone before the altar. A single candle burned beside the cross. He prayed for the castle, for the Lord, for the souls of the people within the walls, and for whatever was coming from beyond them. The stone walls of the chapel were cold, and his prayers echoed faintly in the empty space. The stables were quiet. The horses stood in their stalls, shifting their weight, breathing slowly. The grooms slept near the door, wrapped in a blanket, one hand resting on the latch. The Lord's warhorse stood apart from the others, larger, darker, already saddled in the groom's mind, for a ride that had not yet been ordered. In the kitchen, the fire had been damped, but not extinguished. The bakers would rise in a few hours to begin again. The bread would be baked. The water would be drawn. The routine would continue, because the routine was all they had. Outside the walls, the countryside lay dark and silent. No lights, no fires, no movement on the roads. Whatever was coming had not yet arrived. The horizon was empty, and the emptiness was both a comfort and a threat. For one more night, the castle still lived by routine. The fires still burned. Bread was still cut. Orders were still obeyed. But beyond the walls, the world was changing. And soon, this place built for power would have to prove it was built for survival. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this kind of deep historical reconstruction, please subscribe to Walter Reconstructs History. I make videos that bring lost castles, decisive moments, and great turning points back to life in a way that is simple, visual, and grounded in real history. And if there is another lost castle, forgotten battle, or vanished world you want to see rebuilt, leave it in the comments. What should I reconstruct next on Walter Reconstructs History?